I spoke with Sarah Owens. She's a cookbook author, and one of her cookbooks is called Sourdough. So it's just loaded with, and it's really it's not a beginner sourdough cookbook. It's really for people who know what they're doing already, so that then you can improve and sort of mix it up a little bit. And I was, talking to her and said, kind of asking her kind of a how-to, and said, her interview was amazing. I love her, but I said, so Sarah, okay, so what if I don't have an organic heritage grain in my cupboard? What am I going to do? And so we had to almost stop the interview because she's like, well, you're just not going to make anything if you don't have organic heritage grains, because that's her big thing. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and I totally respect that, but and it's piqued my interest, frankly. And just like you said, if you have maybe it's my ingredients, maybe it's because I'm using this industrialized flour, which I've learned so much about because of Sarah. But what's the deal with, have you run into this, how passionate people can be about using real flour, and what is real flour versus what we buy from King Arthur?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's such a thing that is really coming out recently in the US because we've just been so used to commercial flour. And really that came out of industrialization, right? So if you kind of look back, like backtrack, or even now, if you go to Europe, if any of us have been fortunate to go to Europe, go to France, you're like, why are these people, they're eating bread all the time? They're not fat. They look amazing. Like, what is happening? And it's because they are eating heirloom, real organic flour. Amongst other things, they're eating like real, grass-fed butter. Like organic is so big in Europe, and they have so many regulations. Here, we don't have that same thing, right? So, a long time back, they have cut wheat production so that they only do one type of wheat, and they cut it too short. They don't let it grow. And that's so that we can make more of it and you can make it faster. And then on top of that, you're putting it into all of these machines, and that's how we're making our bread now, right? So I think that's what she's also touching on, is like, we don't have this natural variety of wheat and flour like we used to, and like what they have in Europe. And so we have to really try to find that now, and it's hard.
It's harder.
It's
more
hard
expensive
to find it, and it's more expensive too. Baked goods are so different. It was never a push for us to use organic heirloom grains for our baked goods, but it does make such a big difference for the bread, for sure. So I'm still learning about it all the time too. It's fascinating because in the US, it's just not been a thing. And I think we're coming up on that. I think in the same way, circling back to way earlier in our conversation, third wave coffee being the big movement. I think that's where we're at with bread. We're at the very beginning of people really appreciating the difference between good bread and store-bought bread, just like they were interested in the difference between Folgers and spending a couple more bucks on a cup of coffee that tastes like coffee, that's ethically sourced, that the roaster, all of that. So that's where we're at with bread too.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to find someone who can talk with me about the science of like the digestion, the enzymes in the process, because frankly, there's a lot of, people, we know this from going through the election, and social media has a lot of bunk, and you can find really false stuff out there, people making claims, and the industry is trying to make money off of people. And Sarah makes a really good point, Sarah Owens. I'll have to dig it up and find it for people to put it into this episode. But just that there's sort of like, it's the gluten-free movement. She really came down hard on that movement, and how the corporations took advantage of people's fear.
Yes.
And really didn't educate them about about really, how you can solve a gluten issue. And I certainly want to encourage people to realize that we're not doctors here. You should talk to a doctor, of course, if you're sick. But that in some way we've been manipulated into this fad. I don't want to just call it a fad, because some people obviously it's a real medical issue, but there are simpler solutions upstream.
Absolutely. It's such a fascinating topic, and I'm sure she can speak much better than I can about this. But bread gets such a bad rep, for example, because they think gluten gluten is bad for me. Gluten makes me fat. If you don't have celiac, if you're just like a normal person who can actually eat bread, and that's not true, especially naturally leavened bread actually has all these enzymes that are good for your digestion system. What really a lot of things that have caused gluten intolerance, from my understanding, in celiac has been how we produce bread in this country. That's why you don't see it so much in France and Europe, because they don't mill, they don't produce, they don't eat bread the way that we do here. So she's right. It's just such a movement of going back to how we did things for thousands and thousands of years, that people were not sick, because they did it right, and they were patient. And if you learn that while making your own bread, the patience you need to have, that it's just not America, capitalist, consumerist, industrialized.
It's not Wall Street
country. No, because no one wants to wait 2 days to have a loaf of bread, Right.
But come to find out, people are interested in that weight, and people are getting sick and tired of getting sick, right? So they are like seeking out these recipes and finding ways to do it. My son has had severe nut and milk allergies. And that's a great example, classic example, because we've been fortunate to connect with doctors who have desensitized him.
Wow.
There are certain allergists out there that are doing this now. They've been doing it in Europe for a long time with food allergies, and introducing, rather than telling your patient you have to avoid this food for the rest of your life and sort of a life sentence, saying, no, actually, we're going to take the risk. We're going to put our license on the line and practice medicine and tell you to start eating this food that has the avoidance of which has caused the sickness. And so he's been free of peanut allergies, free of dairy allergies, and now we're working on all the tree nuts. And so
that's amazing. I've never heard that before. That's so cool.
Yep.
And how much is that going to change his life? I just can't imagine.
I was in tears when this, and I want to interview this doctor as well sometime, because I know it touches the lives in profound ways of so many people. Because you first of all are anxious all the time about food, and food is the last thing we want to be anxious about. Just recorded an episode with a woman who wrote a book about eating disorders, but that's, food can take on such a kind of a battleground state in our psyche, because it is such a common thing, way in which we either soothe ourselves or frankly punish ourselves. And like she was talking about, the way in which food, whole eating can be really wonderful, and it's kind of past due time for us to be doing that in this country. But also, it can take on a sort of compulsive, bent to it. If like you won't eat unless you get that granola bar across, but you have to drive 10 miles to get it, or you're not going to bake bread unless you have a certain kind of flour. Well, wait a minute, where can you live a whole life and still be kind to yourself and do the best, and also still try to make improvements?